So today, we will be talking about how to talk to your children about touch without scaring them. And how the presentation is going to go is that I'm going to give some disclaimers. Then we're going to talk about the services the Women's Center provides. We're going to kind of go over the different departments of the Women's Center and make sure that you guys have the contact information, which will be listed in the presentation. After that, we're going to look at some of the objectives of this presentation, and then we'll kind of go through that, and then I'll explain further then. There will be some spaces for questions. Please feel free to unmute whenever I prompt for questions and please answer. And if at any point in time throughout the presentation there's a question, you can always leave in the chat, and then I'll make sure to, as there's mediated breaks throughout, I'll make sure to stop and kind of answer them as they come. Okay, then with that, we'll start the first disclaimer. Okay. So this first disclaimer is just an expression of the fact that these opinions in this presentation do not reflect those of the funders of the Women's Center. The Women's Center is a nonprofit and is funded by a lot of wonderful people that believe in the mission of the Women's Center and the services that we provide to the community. And if any opinions in this presentation are mine alone and just an observation of research that I'm presenting to you today. So pretty much it's just saying, please do not attack any of the funders or any people that are associated with the Women's Center simply because of the opinions presented here today, or the research presented here today. Yeah. Any questions on that? No? Okay. And now we're going to talk about the services the Women's Center provides. So the Women's Center is a nonprofit organization that started in 1979 as an employment solutions. I'm going to use the annotator here. Moment. So we started Employment Solutions. So Employment Solutions is a department that focuses mostly on providing services for people that are unemployed or underemployed, meaning that there's a lot of job coaching, some interview skill coaching, a lot of focus on providing connections with financial coaching institutions in the community, much like Pathfinders. We have certain connections with them, and the like. We also have a general counseling department that focuses on that has a hotline, or excuse me, a helpline where you can call and kind of get connected with other sources and services within the community. Oh, one moment, sorry. Okay, I'll stop annotating for a moment. And yes, sorry, I was trying to admit some people in there. So in the general counseling, we also have pay scale counseling that's specifically for more general mental health issues, more like depression, anxiety, large changes in life. As well, we also have what we call the PROS program, which is about engaging the elderly population within the community, and making sure that in engaging the elderly population, they combat things like depression, isolation through that communal effort. Last but not least, we have what we call the Rape Crisis and Victim Services Department. In this department, specifically, we work with people that are currently in crisis, people that have been in crisis. These services are, when it comes to people that are currently in crisis, we have a 24-hour hotline where someone can call and get some information on what are the next steps. We also have sexual assault advocates, where we will send a sexual assault advocate with a person that has been a victim of a violent or sexual crime to the ER and to different steps of that process to provide information about victims' rights, as well as support throughout that situation, which is very isolating and very lonely to experience. We also have some case managers that work in staff that kind of help people like troubleshoot situations. Now, for people that have been in crisis, have been victims of the violence or sexual crime, we also have free counseling, as well as the case managers. We also have an in-house lawyer that provides legal assistance and takes on a number of cases a year. And yeah, there are other services that the Women's Center that department provides, but I'm kind of blanking in the moment. But more than anything, I will make sure to leave a flyer in the comment section after the first video we're gonna watch, and you guys can have it. Make sure that you guys save it as a PDF file and are able to access the phone numbers. Last but not least, we have what we call the Violence and Prevention Education Department, which is the one that that I work for, where we provide information not only to adults and professionals, but also in the Play It Safe program, where in 2018 we were able to talk to over 140,000 children. Last year we were able to get in contact with almost 80,000 children. The numbers have been a little different since COVID and other different legal precedents, but the program is still very good at giving children an understanding of the language, a understandable amount of language. Excuse me, the little dot keeps shining and distracting. Sorry. And yeah, it's really helpful for children to understand these topics that in a way that is palatable at their ages. Okay. Are there any questions on anything I've said? I've kind of just been going kind of quick. Any questions? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Valencia. Oh, Valencia. Okay. So with that, we can begin with the presentation. So our objectives for today are to define child sexual abuse. We're gonna learn some numbers and some stats behind what child sexual abuse is. Then we're gonna talk about how we can teach children to recognize, respond, and report, and what this can look like. We're gonna look at some talking points in order to kind of emphasize that recognition piece. And ultimately, we're gonna talk about what to do in situations when a child does disclose so that we react in a way that is productive to having that child continue that process and get the justice and healing that they deserve and need. Okay. So with that, we can get into the first question of the day. So a lot of times I feel like we have the conversation about regarding, is this an appropriate conversation for children, right? Is this something that we should be talking with our kids? And well, today I can say that very much it is a needed conversation. And my question for you, and I'll put it in the chat too, is when do you think is the right time to talk to your kids about abuse? And I'll give you guys some time to give some answers, whether in the chat or if you guys want to unmute yourself, you can always raise your hand and we can give you a moment to speak as well. Delete messages, yeah.
In question, I'm sorry, just a quick question. So do you mean what age or circumstance?
I would say that what age do you think would be best to talk to your children? Yeah, that'd be a yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. No, of course, thank you. Okay, 4, okay. And they start talking. Yes, very good, Erica. Thank you, Valencia. Thank you, S. Hutchinson. As soon as they can formulate sentences, put in a way they can understand. Okay, yeah, absolutely, in a way they can understand. As soon as they understand every child is different. Okay, absolutely. as soon as they recognize their sexual organs could be, yeah, it could be as young as 1 or 2. Absolutely. When they're not under your supervision. Okay. Yeah. Hey, I think those are all great points. So what I like to say, and what we like to hear say at the Women's Center, is that the best moment was yesterday. The best moment is, well, now. And really, what
So
really
at this time, this will be the first call.
okay. Sorry about that. Um, so the best moment is now, right? And this conversation is going to look different at different ages. But it can be simple. And now we're going to watch a video that kind of talks about what this looks like at different ages.
So 4 by 1.
Okay. Let me know if you guys can. Oh, spoilers. Let me know if you guys can hear the video. Can anybody hear the video?
You live your life
Can anybody hear the video? Okay, perfect. Cool.
Yes.
Let me
without being
Thank you so much.
mom, and then all of a sudden your mom just let you go with her out of the hospital, and so it's
can't live in fear, but we can arm them with the right knowledge.
Let's pause what we're doing if we happen to be.
Scary. But just because something is scary doesn't mean that that you can't talk about it.
it's so common that you can't close your eyes to it and just hope, because that won't make it go away.
We can't live in fear, but we can arm them with the right knowledge.
Let's pause what we're doing if we happen to be late for something. Fine. This is important to talk about. We're not going to put it off.
It's really important to start as early as you can. You know, it's kind of something we work on, not every day, but regularly enough.
If you do it before they're 5, it's just science, right? They're always just interested in that.
It's not something that you've mentioned once or twice and you think that it's done. It develops as they develop.
When you get to have the conversation and it's a high fidelity conversation, meaning that they're getting the information they want, that information helps arm him against misinformation that he might hear from others.
It's always good to learn a definition of something and know what something means.
You know, I want her to be happy, and I want her to be safe, and I want her to be confident in her ability to protect herself. If you do it in such a way that the children can understand, the hopeful message is that they can prevent it from happening to them.
If you have a good relationship and you have that rapport and you've taught your child they deserve to be treated well, I feel like that's the best protection from harm. My wish would be that I've done everything I can to make sure he has the information he needs to make the best choices.
My only hope is that we continue to teach them, and then once they walk out these doors, we've taught them enough that they can discern when to put the right protection around themselves.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment and we can kind of discuss about that video. So any thoughts on the video? Any thoughts on when is the best time and how this conversation can kind of look differently at different ages? And if you guys would like to share, you're more than welcome to. I'm kind of torn because I don't want to arm my kids with this information and they misuse it. Okay, and I think that that is a fear, right? That maybe like in wanting to educate a child, we actually arm them with information that might be harmful to someone else. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Conversation looked very different between my son. Yeah, and I think that there is that like sometimes we have different feelings about the conversation when it comes to young boys and young girls. I do think that's an aspect of the conversation as well. Thank you so much for the answers, guys. And while when we're talking about child sexual abuse, I think that these are things that we do feel, but it's also really important that we do arm both our young boys and young girls with information to for them to be able to understand these topics, regardless of whether they're boys or girls. And I'm gonna go back to the presentation now. Now, when we're talking about child sexual abuse, what we want to okay, there's another age appropriate conversation with kids. So since they were 18 months or now they're 7 months, Yeah, and having age appropriate conversations is something we're definitely gonna circle back to that. And that's a great point. How do we engage in these conversations when our kids are themselves the one to have this? That's a great point. And we'll definitely go back to it. So first we're gonna kind of make a little left turn and start defining these topics and then having a greater understanding of them so we can have these conversations with the kids around us. So when we're talking about child sexual abuse, we are referring to any tricked, forced, manipulated, or coerced sexual activity that is for the pleasure of the abuser, pleasure of or financial benefit of the abuser. And this is usually understood in 3 different forms: physical, verbal, and visual. Now, when we are kind of separating these into physical, verbal, and visual, what we're doing is that we're talking about how is this being experienced by the child, right? If it's verbal, it's something that they're hearing. If it's visual, it's something that they're seeing. And if it's physical, it's something that they can feel in their physical body, right? Some kind of tactile sense. And we also know that these don't happen independently. A lot of times abusers, especially when we get to grooming, will understand that these can all happen at once with the same child. Any questions on the definition of child sexual abuse? Okay. And then we're gonna move right along. And if there are questions, you can always drop them off after I go on to another slide, and I can go back to them a little later. So now we're gonna get into some numbers. We know that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before their 18th birthday. We also know that 90% of sexual abuse victims, or of victims that have been sexually abused, can identify their abuser in a lineup. And this 90% is specific for people under the age of 18. So under 18 and under is 90%. Upwards of 18, it goes down slightly to 80%. Furthermore, we know that when we're talking about the topic of abuse, we often have these ideas of stranger danger, right? Strangers are the ones that are dangerous, but we also know that 35% of people that have sexually abused children were people that were in the home or family members within that household. So that kind of really upends that myth that this is someone that the child doesn't know, or someone that is kind of like in a bush waiting for this child, right? It's very much someone that has access to the child. Excuse me. Furthermore, we know that 7 through 13 is whenever a child's the most vulnerable to sexual abuse. Now, when we look at this last number here, 1 in 7 children receive unwanted sexual solicitations via the internet. Can I get a show of hands of how many of us have a child that loves being on the internet, loves being on the phone, loves Miss Rachel, maybe. Okay, that was yes, yeah, quite a few. Yep, absolutely. So we know that there's a lot of it's very common for children to be online, and it is one of those spaces where children sometimes are kind of, it's one of those spaces where they're there by themselves sometimes, right? So it's important that whenever we talk about safety and personal safety, we also extend those rules that we're setting up to also extend to whenever they're online, right? Because the same safety rules that happen that we use a lot of times for like stranger danger, not giving personal information, not talking to strangers, sometimes children feel a little bit more comfortable online. So it's important that we also let them know that, again, you are interacting with strangers. You have to be careful in those spaces. And we're gonna talk about grooming in a few moments, and kind of talk about how that kind of those two can be involved. Any questions on any of these numbers? A question that I do want to ask is, did we think it was gonna be that higher, or do we think that number might actually even be higher? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yes, it's definitely higher. We do know that sexual abuse is a very underreported crime. Absolutely. Hey, thank you, Ms. Latoya. Thank you, Ms. Valencia. Absolutely. Yeah, great. Yeah, great point. Keisha. Yes. Kesha. Yeah, this just was reported, so it's higher. Absolutely. And then as we move on, we have to understand that, again, sexual abuse can happen to boys and girls of all ages, right? This is something that happens to any person, regardless of who you are. And when we're talking about this topic, we're talking about trauma. This is a very traumatizing situation whenever a person is sexually abused. And whenever we say the word trauma, what we're talking about is an instance where a person is going through a situation that engages their sympathetic nervous system, right? Their fight or flight responses. But in these situations, this threat that's happening is one that is not manageable. It is out of the hands of the child, right? This is happening to a child. And this can have long-standing effects on a child when they go through this kind of trauma. And we're very aware of that. And that's why it's so important that we're intentional about taking on these ideas and kind of having these conversations with the children, because it is a very important topic. With that being said, we also have to be aware that it is never too late to get help, right? We're very much dealing with a very big problem, but we never want to go into it with like a level of cynicism or a level of dejection, not thinking that we can make a change, right? Those numbers before us are situations that have happened, but it's not necessarily have to be the future, right? We hope that these numbers can continue to go down, and that hopefully one day this won't have to be a national health crisis as it is now. And yeah, but more than anything, I want you guys to, as you guys are kind of, once we make the left turn from all like the kind of information we have to know in order to instigate the importance of the topic, I also want you guys to be hopeful that you guys can very much create a change in the lives of the children in your lives. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the effects of sexual abuse on children. Now, in the short term, this can be a number of things. Again, trauma is something that happens. It's a very individualized situation. Someone can have all these, or someone can just have a couple of these. These are just some of the common symptoms or reactions. Some of the most common are STDs or STIs, especially for younger children, since there's no real reason for a child that's 8, 9. Oh, of course, yes, you're more than welcome to screenshot it. Yeah, thanks for asking first, though. STDs or STIs, because again, there's no real reason why an 8, 9, 10-year-old should be having a sexually transmitted disease. Regressive behaviors can sometimes be a big milestone for, like, it can be a really big red flag, especially if like a child that's been potty trained for 2, 3, 4 years kind of regresses to bedwetting, or like thumb sucking whenever it wasn't the usual behavior for them. That's a very big red flag. Another one that is very common is what we call a lack of felt safety, which is that a child does not feel safe in any environment, right? Even though the environment around them is a safe environment, like a room or a common environment, they themselves do not feel that like feeling of safety, of I'm okay. Which can be a very long-standing effect of being in situations where you were supposed to be able to trust people around you and you weren't, right? And in the long-term effects, right, that felt safety, eating disorders, depression, anxiety. Whenever we talk about sexual promiscuity or boundaries, sexual promiscuity is really more so in very young ages, like this idea of having information that isn't common for a 7 or 8-year-old to have. This can look very differently in teenagers, right? More than anything, the biggest red flag is a departure from usual behavior of a child. Like if a child was a A student their whole life and then now they're making C's, that's definitely something to look into. If a child's been a predominant D to C student and now they're like making A's all the time and they're constantly like on top of the schoolwork, again, that drastic change of behavior might also be something to look into. Even though it can be seen as positive, it should definitely get some attention. Any questions on that? Okay, and if I'll give it a minute. Okay. Okay, then we'll move on to again, this is just another list. If you guys would like to take a picture of this one as well, you're more than welcome to. When we're looking at physical indicators, some discomfort, vaginal or rectal discharge or bleeding, again, the STIs. And when it comes to emotional indicators, it can be like inappropriate sexual knowledge, anger, hostility, right, outside of the ordinary, suicidal ideation. When we're talking about behavior, we're talking about unusual school behavior, sexual acting out, poor peer relationships, right? And inability to have stable relationships can sometimes be a red flag as well. Yeah, and these are just some of these are fairly commonly known. I think that there's a lot of like whenever we think of sexual assault, we usually or sexual abuse, we usually attribute the physical symptoms and the physical aspect to it as a very common aspect of it. Is a very common thing. Okay. Any questions? We're gonna move right along. So now we're gonna talk about the how. So we're gonna talk about grooming. So when we're talking about grooming, we're gonna be talking about grooming as it pertains to the process that perpetrators or abusers use to kind of like trick the community into trusting them. And I kind of want to open it up to the chat before we kind of get into the process. Like, how do you think that grooming happens? If you guys don't mind sharing, what do you guys think? How do you guys think grooming happens? And I'll put it in the chat. How do you think grooming happens? Silently at first, yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Building trust. I love that answer. Absolutely. Trust, yeah. Great answers. Building rapport, complimentary. Buying favors for the child, yes, absolutely. Building relationships, absolutely. Excitement for the child, making him feel special, compliments, gaining parents' trust, yes. These are some wonderful points, guys. Absolutely, you guys are very much hitting it on the nose. Absolutely. And now we're gonna kind of like go over the process, right? So, some common grooming behaviors: overly interested in the child, give special privileges to the child, absolutely. Befriends family and shows more interest in child than adults. But more than anything, something the commonality between the behavior of predators. Your parents said it's okay. Yes, absolutely. Kind of like telling a child that what's going on is okay. Kind of like grooming them into thinking that what's going on is okay. Absolutely. So we know that the first part of the grooming process is called the engagement, and this is whenever the person comes in contact with the child and the community, and this is the one. This is the part of the process that has can have an extremely long time span, right? A person can be part of the community for 10, 15 years and nothing happen. And they can just be in that time just grooming the community, making sure that the community trusts them. And a lot of the behavior that they go through, right? Getting the trust of people, doing favors, building those relationships with the community is something that that everybody does as they enter a community, right? That is the common thing that we do. We are part of the community. We do favors to people, right? Whenever we move in, we're like, oh, I don't mind cutting the grass for you, or right, just things that a nice, upstanding community member would do. Wanting to be your friend, yeah. And that's with that being said, there are a few red flags that can happen, right? If there's like an over and exaggerated interest in a child, or sometimes like let's say like they're a coach, maybe they'll have the child always starting games. Maybe they'll give them like special favors or special privileges, right? If they're maybe a pastor, they might have the child be like a leading figure in the church, right? And it's just about granting privileges and making the child feel special, because they do want the child to think that this is okay. Regardless of how long that process is, right? Eventually will come the point of enactment. And that's whenever the sexual abuse happens. This can be a form of groping or a form of sexual assault. Maybe like us showing a form of pornography to the child, right? Something that is explicitly not okay. And again, this doesn't happen all at once. Sometimes during the engagement phase, like the child might be shown like pornography or something inappropriate. Maybe whenever the child came over, their towel fell. There were accidents that happened in an attempt to kind of see how the child would react, kind of like testing the waters. But the point of enactment is whenever it is very clearly something that wasn't okay, which then triggers the secrecy. Secrecy is whenever the abuser deliberately makes a secret of the child and coerces or intimidates the child into remaining quiet about what happened. So this can be something like, if you tell anybody, you're gonna get in a lot of trouble, or why would you tell anybody? Nobody's gonna believe you. Or your parents are gonna get really upset at you if you tell them, like, because they're gonna think you're lying, you're in so much trouble, right? It's about finding a way of intimidating that child into silence, into not saying anything. Keep this between us, or they will take you away. Absolutely, that is a great point. And yes, but regardless of all these things that happen, the child will still feel that something isn't okay, which will then lead to the next part, which is disclosure. Disclosure is whenever the child tells a trusted adult what happened. Now, because this person has groomed the community, a number of things might happen. One, the adult that the child told might ask too many questions, which then makes the child feel like they won't be believed. Maybe the adult reacts in a way that is very dismissive, like, oh, okay, kids just make things up, whatever you're saying. And the kid just feels very dismissed. Or maybe the opposite, where the parent is too aggressive, is like, oh, they did that, okay, let's go over there and fix it right now, right? And in that I think very common response, the child then becomes scared because now they're thinking of protecting their parent, right? So there's a couple of things there that we have to be very mindful of when responding to these situations. Last but not least, depending on the reaction, what will happen then is the recantation, which is the point of the process where the child will take back what they said, right? They have found that them speaking up is not something that they want to go through with, so they're just going to take it back. And when we look at the numbers of children of like false reports, a lot of times those first false reports were actually a child that, through a number of reasons, ended up recanting, and then years later came back and said, no, this did happen. I just didn't want either my parent to get in trouble or for them not to believe me or to go through this for no reason. So again, that's something that we have to be very mindful of as well. Yeah, thanks so much for Dr. Woodson for being here. So yeah, and that's the grooming process. Any questions on the grooming process before I move on to some common myths? Okay. Now these are just some common myths of about child abusers. I think the most common one is that like child molesters target children nearby. We know that this is that only men sexually abuse children, right? Men and women both are likely to be not likely, but are able to be abusers, and it's important to be mindful of that. Stranger danger, I think, is the biggest myth here, where we think that only strangers are like in bushes or in vans, right? There's a lot of there's a lot of things that we hear constantly about stranger danger, and a very big campaign that happened during the 90s. And last but not least, this myth that sexual victimization as a child will result in someone growing up to be a sex offender. When we look at the numbers, sex offenders or regular people have the exact same likelihood of being offenders, right? There's no more likelihood of someone that has been victimized being sex offender. Okay. Also, victims are typically girls. Sometimes we kind of think that this is just for a girls' conversation, right? This is just for, and even us as the Women's Center, right? I think that sometimes people disassociate that. But again, our services are for men, women, and children. We know that this sadly happens to any person. Yeah, just make sure to have that in mind. So now we're gonna get into the part of the conversation that's gonna be productive and not as sad or downtrodden, which is how do we have these conversations with children without scaring them? So here we're gonna talk about how to recognize, right? We started the conversation by helping them recognize. So this is talking about different touches, right? We're gonna identify safe touch, unsafe touch, and then confusing touch. Unsafe touch is physical abuse, confusing touch is sexual abuse. Now, when we talk about safe touches, we're setting up the standard for how children understand that behavior should be, right? We're talking about a touch that is not only safe and doesn't hurt, but also a touch that makes us feel cared for and safe, right? It's not only about the physical sensation, but also that emotional response that we're having. And it's important that those two are consistent with each other, right? If someone gives us a hug and we feel uncomfortable, that's not okay, right? And whenever a child feels that way, it's important that they start to build those boundaries that, hey, if they don't feel comfortable giving someone a hug, that if they have that feeling, they have the right to speak up and tell us. Next we have unsafe touches, right? Whenever we do the Play It Safe program, we like to talk about unsafe touches that hurt for a really long time and leave bruises, welts, or blood. Right, and then we also like to make make a key difference between what a safe spanking is and what physical abuse is, right? A safe spanking has a reason, right? It happens as a way for a parent to let a child know that what happened wasn't okay, as a form of discipline. But there's a key difference between I'm giving you the spanking so you can learn this lesson, and I'm giving you the spanking because I'm so angry and I need to get it out some way. Right, and there's a key difference to how those two touches feel for a child, and how they're implemented as well, right? If a parent is not being mindful of how hard they're hitting a child, they can cause some real harm. Whereas someone is just giving a pat on the bottom to be like, hey, this isn't okay. That's far more recognizable and understandable from the child. Any questions on that? Before we move on. Okay. And if there are, you can always bring them down. Last but not least, we have confusing touch, which is another an understandable way of saying sexual abuse. And this is important to have two things. One, it's whenever someone tries to look at, take a picture of, or touch a child's private parts, but also it's whenever someone tries to make that child look at, take a picture of, or take a picture of, or touch their private parts, right? It's not only the act of someone touching you, but it's also making you do those kind of acts to someone else, right? Those are both equally sexual abuse, and it's important a child knows that if someone maybe tries to be sneaky and says, hey, maybe you can touch me, it'll be okay. They understand that that's not something they have to do either, right? It's important that they know that that's not okay. Okay, so that's what we mean by recognizing. And some talking points for this can be identifying private parts, right? We want to identify private parts, one, because it's important for a child to know their anatomy. And also, on the other end, if a child were to be abused, whenever they're going through that investigative process, it's important for the child to be able to identify where they were touched in a way that's understandable for other adults, and specifically for the defense, right? There has happened in the past where a child will use a euphemism given to them by a parent, and the defense uses that lack of clarity in the language to kind of mitigate the case, or the standing case. I had to get my legal speak up. Excuse me. And yeah, it's also, and the last one that I want to talk about is that when we're talking about predators are very much cowardly and very like calculated and not trying to get in trouble, and they want to make sure that they're targeting a child that they have an imbalance of power with. And if a child is very outspoken and is aware of these things, the predator also goes, oh, I don't want to mess with that. I don't want to mess with them because they're a child that is going to speak up, right? So it's important to have that in mind. So that also makes a child less likely to be targeted. And these conversations are conversations that are going to go on for a long time. They're going to be different as a child gets older, right? But they start in small actions, right? Whenever we give our child safe touches, we give them a standard for what is a proper type of behavior. Whenever we let them make decisions about their body, we also let them know that they're in charge of their body, right? Whenever we tell them that it's okay to not hug or kiss someone they don't want to hug or kiss, we're letting them know that their voice has power. And that can be very important as a child gets older, to know that they have that ability and that control over their actions and who they interact with and how they interact with people around them. And also another one that's really important is kind of like whenever you're having casual conversation, just like having scenarios, right? Like let's say that there's a TV show going on and you're like, okay, so like let's say someone were to touch you in a confusing way and they ask you to keep it a secret, what should you do? And then making sure that we talk about what that response needs to be. And that kind of brings us to how do we teach them to respond? So in the Play It Safe program, we love to use the safety rule, say no, get away, and tell a trusted adult. And whenever we're in the classroom, we like to do like, say no, get away, tell a trusted adult, and the kids get to do it and they have a great time. We also emphasize to make sure to keep on telling until someone believes you, someone understands you, believes you, and helps you, right? Having that understanding that if something doesn't happen, they have to keep on telling until they do get the help they need. Yes, you can get a copy of these slides presented tonight. I'll leave my contact information will be in. I'll make sure to put my email in the chat, and then if you guys inquire for the slides, I'll be more than happy to send them your way. And yes, some talking points, right? Setting boundaries at an early age making a big distinction between secrets and surprises, right? Children have what we call black and white thinking a lot of times. So having a difference in a very specific difference in language, right? Secrets are things that we should never keep and they're bad, and surprises are fun things that sometimes we need to do for birthday parties, right? Knowing that a child can know that if someone makes them keep a secret that they have to tell us, and if someone makes them keep a surprise, that it's not bad, right? Yeah, so also supporting your child's decision, being an advocate for them, knowing that like they'll be supported by you in situations, even whenever other people, like let's say that we have a family member and they're upset that they're not giving them a hug. If you stand your ground with the child, they know, oh, I have a support system that's gonna support me no matter what happens, and that is extremely important for a child, and their understanding of their safety. Next, we want to empower them to report. So we report to who? To our family members, right? Parents, uncles, siblings, cousins. In school, this can be teachers, coaches, principals, counselors, any trusted adult on the campus. In the community, this can be neighbors, babysitters, our pastors, store clerks, police, right? A lot. As many adults as we want to kind of let them know. But more than anything, if it's important to let them know that if the first adult they tell doesn't understand or believe them, they have to keep on telling different ones until someone does. Okay, and that's what we really want to let them know, right? We want to let them recognize what is a dangerous situation. We want to let them know how they can respond initially, and then whenever they're reporting, who are they reporting to, right? Those three pieces are really important. And kind of flow very nicely in the conversation. Like, okay, you can always tell me or your dad, or you can always tell your uncle, your aunt, mom, right? Any person that is in that family unit. And next, we're gonna talk for a moment about disclosures. Before we move on to disclosures, I want to make sure that if anybody has any questions, if anybody has any questions, you feel free to ask them. Give a little second to see if there's any. Yeah, lots of blended or joint zones. They're in custody. So I would say that when it comes to like the really good thing about these rules is that they can be involved for any person, right? So regardless of the family unit, it's important that we identify not the who, but the what, right? Instead of it being like, oh, these are the adults you can talk to, it's important that we talk about these are what trusted adults are, right? Adults that the adults around us in our different families, adults that we feel comfortable with, adults that we see every day in school. And just finding moments within the day, right? Whenever we're kind of just spending time with them. Maybe when we want to use a movie, or whenever we're asking them some highlights or lowlights of the day, maybe we can find some moments there. When we're talking about safety rules, maybe we're watching, maybe they got into a little fight with their friend at school. That would be a great time to talk about like personal safety. And this is just an extension of that, right? Boundaries are set up in different interactions throughout our day. Does that help at all? I hope I answered that question. Because I do understand that this does feel, with like blended families, it might be a little bit unique. But I do think that this topic is one that regardless of your family arrangement, it shouldn't be a barrier for those conversations. But I'll keep thinking on that question. Okay. As we go into disclosure, I want you guys to remember that again, sexual abuse is trauma. The number one reason why children do not speak up is because they fear they would not be believed. They're also really afraid of hurting their family. They believe they might be taken away from their family. And this is very much a real fear for children. Obviously, sometimes respective of their family's situation. Which is why it's so important that we're aware that, again, children often shut down if a trusted adult doesn't believe them or respond negatively, which is why it's so important that we mitigate that, like that we're aware of our response. They sometimes change or retract their story, right? Children don't always have the best memory. And they can sometimes, in our moment of wanting to do the best we can, we might get agitated, and we have to be really mindful of just remaining calm. So here we're going to talk about some of the key things to have in mind when a disclosure is being told to you. We want to make sure to stay calm. Don't overreact, whether it be too negative or too dismissive. We want to make sure that we're listening and believing what the child is telling us. We want to ask a few open-ended questions, like, tell me more about that. Who did that? Where were you when that happened? And those two parts of information are more than enough to make a CPS report. And we want to let you guys know to not investigate it. Why? This child is going to have to go through an investigative process. They're going to have to go through an interview with a professional that will ask a lot of questions, and we don't want to exhaust the child before this process takes place. And also, we don't want the child to feel like they did something wrong. And sometimes when they ask a lot of questions, that probing can have like a negative adverse effect on the child. We like to follow the BASER model here. We want to make sure that we believe. Make sure that we tell them, I believe you. We want to affirm, I'm glad you told me, you're doing the right thing. Support them. Hey, I'm going to be here with you the whole time. It was not your fault. You're not doing anything wrong. Empower. Hey, there's things we can do to make you feel better. And then ultimately report. I'm going to talk with some people who can help. We can talk to some people, and they're going to help us make you feel better and help with this whole situation. And then we have to make sure that we do go on and report it to the proper authorities, whether it be CPS or local law enforcement. And we do want to make sure that we do keep in mind. I know that we talked a lot about why we have to be mindful of this, and this can be a difficult topic, but we do go to this with the hope that that we can help not only people prevent this, but also that even if this does happen, it would never be a child's fault, and it would never be too late for them to get help, because nothing is wrong with them. They're not damaged. Something happened to them, and it is us as their support system, as the adults in their life, to help them through the situation. And last but not least, this is a list of resources in the community, if you guys would like to take a picture of this as well. And that concludes our presentation. I will leave up a QR code with asking for you guys to do the feedback form. And then I'll also put the link in the chat if you guys would please do the feedback form. It'd be really helpful. Oh, of course, yes. Sorry. Here you go. No, thank you for coming to the presentation. It was a pleasure to have you. Pleasure to talk to all of you today. Once I'm gonna keep the resources up for like a minute, and then I'm gonna go back to the feedback form. I'm trying to put the link in the chat, and it's not letting me. So thank you so much. That's very kind. I'm very glad that this could be helpful. Meshan or Meshan. Yes, and make sure that if you want any more resources, whether it be numbers for the Women's Center, make sure to email Mr. Rashad, and he can get you in touch with me. That's very kind. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you guys for sharing, taking the time out of your day to come to the presentation. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you for leaving your contact information. make sure to. And we're done. Okay. Yeah, if you have any more questions, please make sure to send them my way. I would love to answer any of them. And then in the feedback form, you can leave any questions, and I can always reach back out to Mr. Rashad with some answers, or add it to the next presentation. Because again, we can always do another one next year with some extra information here or there.
Hey, Mr. Guadalupe.
Yes.
Hey, I appreciate that. And just to also let them know, on March 27th, we have another presentation coming up. So we're going to be doing this the last Tuesday of each month for the next few months.
Yes. We'll be having one in, like Mr. Muhammad said, on March. We're gonna have another one in April. The one in March is gonna be on sexting and cyberbullying. The one in April will be on healthy versus unhealthy relationships, and ultimately the one in May 20th, will be on ACEs and adverse, like having a trauma-informed lens while having these conversations. So there'll be a lot of really good information. And if you guys have any questions from the previous presentation, I'll try to make sure that we have a little bit of time after to kind of answer some of those questions too. So please feel free to come to the sessions with a lot of questions, and I'd love to answer any of them. Okay.
All right, and if you send me the resources and presentation, I've already received some emails, and I'll get that information out to them as soon as possible.
Okay, perfect. I'll make sure to send that by probably tomorrow morning. I'll make sure to send everything in an email.
Perfect. Thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you. Oh, it's amazing. Thank you so much, Thank you so much for sharing your PTA meeting. Mr. Muhammad, question.
Yes, sir.
Will the Spanish presentation be on here too?
Yeah, it's gonna be the same link, so everybody can go ahead and log off, and then that should start around 6:45. Now he sent this link out to everybody for the 5:30 meeting, so maybe we'll see how many people hop on the Spanish presentation.
Okay, perfect. I wanted to make sure. Okay, well, thank you so much for attending. Please make sure to do the feedback forms if you can, and then you're free to go. You can go now. I hope you have a good night. It was great talking to everybody. Have a great day.